Hi, sorry about that.
Happens.
Hopefully you don't do CW.
No, but I had to cut a little bit out of it on both sides to be able to play the bass guitar. I don't think the doctor was too happy with that, but
Oh, you did? Oh, my.
it was actually too tight, so I cut it because of that.
And how to Jim and Brian and Ramon. Hi there.
Victor,
Hi.
Richard,
Rabindranatha. Wow, there's a lot of people here. Jose, Rafael, Galaxy,
Ken,
J4. Wow. Yvette. Hola.
We are live now on YouTube also.
No, I'm in the using Zoom.
No, I know, but we are also broadcasting this live on YouTube now.
Oh, you are. Oh, hi everyone.
We already have 6 people on Zoom and on YouTube, so just a couple of minutes so we can start the production. Guys, have everybody here. Thank you very much.
shall we? Augusto, George?
Yeah, hello, Ken.
Hi, Ramon.
Good to see you. Arturo, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
And
George, are we ready to start?
Yes. Why don't you go ahead, Ramon? And I'm just making a note here.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. I am Ramon Santoyo, X-ray Echo 1 Kilo Kilo. I am the IARU president. We are IARU Region 2 president. We are very happy to continue with this series of videos and workshops that has been so.
Ramon, you need to unmute yourself, please, because I just muted everybody and I cannot do it without muting you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do I need to start from the beginning or?
Yeah, better.
Okay.
So I can make it.
Good evening to everyone. I am Ramon Santoyo, X-ray Echo 1 Kilo Kilo. I am the IARU Region 2 president. And we are delighted to have you here for another workshop. This time again with Anthony, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango. Before to start and give the word to George, the IARU Region 2 Secretary, I just want to acknowledge the presence of the IARU Region 3 Secretary, Ken Yamamoto from Japan, who always join us from a very uncomfortable time for him. Ken, thank you very much for joining once again from a difficult time zone for this conference. Also, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Cesar Santos, Hotel Radio 2 Papa, who is the emergency communication coordinator from Region 2. We are delighted to have you here. And of course, many of you who are a part of the member societies and IARU Executive Committee. George, Victor Echo 3 Yankee Victor, our secretary, please take the word.
Okay, well, good evening. We forgot somebody rather important here. We also have Jose Arturo Molina, Yankee Sugar 1, Mike Sugar, also with us. He's the vice president of Region 2, IARU. I think we've now captured everybody, so thank you very much, Ramon. As Augusto already mentioned, we're also doing this simultaneously on YouTube. I guess it's about a 20-second delay. And so for those of you on YouTube, welcome to you as well as everybody on the Zoom call. We've got a very good attendance again. These workshops have been quite amazing to us to see how many people show up. Just before we get started, and I noticed there are a lot of familiar faces here, so forgive me for repeating myself once again. but just a little bit about what the IARU is for those of you that may not know. IARU is the International Amateur Radio Union. It's an umbrella organization that represents amateur radio to the International Telecommunications Union and is made up of member societies, one per country, of which there are over 160 right now. So in a minute, we're going to play a video on that. So I guess, Augusto, why don't we play the video, and then I'm going to describe what Region 2 is, because that isn't necessarily obvious in the video. So go ahead, Augusto.
Okay.
Augusto, we have no video, just the blank screen.
We do, George.
Okay, that video is courtesy of Carlos, LU1 CBE, who has done a really good job for us. And there's a similar one in Spanish as well for those of you who may attend next week's session on the digital modes in Spanish. Okay, before I introduce our speaker for tonight, please hold your questions until the end of his presentation, because it's entirely possible you'll run across a question and he'll answer it a bit later, but we will have plenty of time for question and answers at the end. For those of you who are on YouTube, please go ahead, make a note of your question, use the YouTube chat. Augusto will be monitoring that, and we'll get to your questions as well, so you don't get left out just because you're not on the Zoom call. So with that, let me introduce Anthony Luscri, Kilo 8 Z Tango. Anthony was licensed first in 1983, and he's been a QRP operator. In fact, he doesn't run more than 5 watts on all bands, as he was just telling us as we were getting ready to go. So he doesn't care what mode he runs. He enjoys contesting, chasing DX, all of those things. and has consistently finished in the top 10 of a variety of major contests. So he clearly understands how to make the most of his approach to amateur radio, which is keep the power down and learn how to pounce on them. He's recently retired. He spent 20 years as a medical technologist working clinical biology, another 20 years as a computer technology coordinator. And in addition to his ham radio, just so he doesn't run out of things to do in his retirement, he also is a trainman on the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad and serves as the ARL Ohio Section Youth Coordinator and works with schools to get amateur radio and radio technology into the classroom curriculum. He lives with his wife, Linda, Kilo Alpha 8, Oscar Delta Papa, near Akron, Ohio, and on a small suburban lot. So with that, please, Anthony, looking forward to your presentation tonight. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, George. Good night. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes,
Very good.
no problem.
Okay, very good. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about FT8 and FT4, and we'll mention a couple other modes in the process. This slideshow contains a number of links. Most of my slideshows are not really slideshows, they're more like a reference book. And so there'll be homework afterward. You'll want to click on the links. So if you jot this down, this is the address to get the web address to get to the presentation. And as my other presentations, it's continuously being edited. So I made some changes again today. So there's a constant edit going on. So I'm always adding new material to it. This is my email. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions, comments, complaints, additions for my slideshow. This is my new QSL card, which I've just gotten printed out. And this is myself in my trainman's uniform. Throughout the slideshow, most of the links are not underlined as is typical on web pages because it makes it hard to see when I'm doing a presentation. So I use a different font for those. On my website, www.k8zt.com, all the material from today, plus other subject areas, contesting, QRP, you name it, it's probably there. These are the links that are just on my digital page of my website. So let's talk about these modes, FT8, FT4. Now, I'm guessing that most of you have either read about it or already working it or have heard about FT8, but if you haven't, you might have heard that repetitive buzzing sound between the CW portion of the band and the phone portion of the band, that if you're not interested in it, can be rather annoying. But if you have a computer that can decode that information, it becomes very interesting. It's one of the fastest growing modes of amateur radio. It's been hard to miss because you keep hearing people talk about the fact that they just got on FT8, they just got on FT4. And when you think about the changes that took place going from AM to single sideband, how it took about 10 to 15 years before we finally changed over, or the time that it took to go from Spark to CW. This is phenomenal that in just a matter of a couple of years at the most, and in the case of FT4, less than a year, these modes have taken off and are in such common use. So first of all, who's responsible? Joe Taylor, K1JT, and that's where the JT in WSJTX comes from. He's a Nobel laureate in physics. He's at Princeton University, retired, and I have a whole link to his bio here. It's rather remarkable, and you're welcome to read through that. Joe started the program in 2001 and then later converted it to an open source program. The two other major developers are Steve Frank and Bill Somerville, and they are both active in developing the program also. But as Joe told me in an email just yesterday, you or anyone else are more than welcome to submit patches or larger revisions to the software. So if you see a feature you'd like to add and you have the capability of doing that, they'd love to have you on the project. Why do I operate FT8? What's my multitasking mode? And I actually started with JT65 as the original mode that I start working with. And I'll talk briefly about that a little bit later, but JT65 took about 1 minute to make each transmission. So it gave me plenty of time to do other things when I was operating JT65. I do a lot of computer work. I do a lot of writing for different magazines and newsletters and web pages. And this is what I do whenever I'm on the computer. So if I'm at the computer, FT4 or FT8 is in the background. Matter of fact, I'm on 6 meters right now. So I will demonstrate a QSO a little bit later if the bands cooperate. One of the neat things about it is it seems that the bands are open more often on FT8 and FT4 than they are on the other modes, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. So I'm interested in operating, and I love operating DX, and I found out that FT8, FT4 allowed me to get a lot more contacts on the bands that I did not have very many contacts on. A lot of the what originally called the work bands. 60 meters, you notice that 98% of my operation on 60 meters is on FT8 or FT4. This is my house. I have a 75 by 160 foot lot. And this is my 160 antenna. It's a giant 60-foot sloper that comes off a 50-foot tower and goes down to about 1.5 feet off the ground. So we're not talking about much. And then when you couple it with 5 watts, I was really interested in these modes for the ability to work 160. And that's originally why I started with JT65 and then went on to FT8. And over the years, I've been able to get my DXCC total on 160 up to 61 countries now. And many more on FT8 than I have been able to on CW or single sideband. It's not necessarily a low power mode, but it works very well for low signals like mine, where you're talking about a combination of low power and a sub-marginal antenna. It's one of the digital modes, often referred to as sound card modes or digital sound card modes. And they utilize the computer sound card to bring in audio from your radio, process it, decode it, and then the information is shown on the computer screen. Just the opposite happens when you transmit. The information goes from your computer screen, is modulated by the software, and then is sent out as a set of digital tones on the radio. So there's a sound card involved somewhere, and it can be in a number of different places. We'll talk about that later, and a radio involved and a computer involved. So those are the 3 major things that we're going to be talking about for these modes. One of the neat things about these modes is once you start operating them, it doesn't really take a lot of hardware changes to add modes. So over the years, they've been able to quickly add modes to the WSJTX software. It uses frequency shift keying, similar to what RTTY does. It's similar to PSK and PSK, but not quite exactly the same. And some of the modes are MSK 144, JT9, JT65, FT8, FT4 are all multiple shift frequency shift keying. And we're not going to go into too many details on that. If you're welcome, you're more than welcome to dive into the manual and read all about the technical aspects. I'm going to talk tonight more about the practical aspects of operating as opposed to the technical nature of the way the signals are done. This is a picture of Joe Taylor. And as I said, the program started in 2001. And since that time, modes have been both added and subtracted from the basic suite. The first program that was added was FSK 441 in 2001, designed to support VHF contacts using radio reflecting ions created by meteor trails in the atmosphere. So it was a meteor scatter mode. JT65 was introduced 2 years later. It was designed for extremely weak but slowly varying signals. And if you know just a little bit of history about Joe Taylor, one of the projects he's worked on scientifically is getting information back from satellites that have long left the Earth's orbit and are traveling across the galaxy. And he's used to having to dig very weak signals out of high noise levels. So that's the whole idea behind all these modes, weak signal. So it was used for troposcatter and for Earth, the moon bouncing. But hams being what they are, decided, well, maybe that would work on the HF bands also. So some people tried it out on HF and it caught on. And that's what gave me the bug. I started with JT65. And the ability to decode the weak signals was paramount in the process. It can decode signals so low that you can't actually physically hear them with your ears when they're on the radio. So you might have your headphones on and not hear a signal in the noise, and the computer can dig it out. There's also data redundancy added to the program. So when it encodes the information, it allows you to retrieve the information without having to hear all the signal and copy all the signal. So it's a redundantly, it's a redundant mode in that it increases the chances of recovering the data. Messages are either typically decoded or not decoded. So you don't get many missed calls where the call sign is decoded wrong. Occasionally you'll see something decoded wrong, but it's usually such ridiculous call sign that you know it's not a real call sign. One of the things that's very important for this process is you need to have a very good time sync of your computer, and everyone needs to follow the same time sync. So just your normal time syncing through MS Windows or something like that is not sufficient. As I'll talk about later, you need to add another time syncing program to your computer to make sure you keep accurate time. You want less than 1/10 of a second difference at best, and at most you can tolerate about 1/2 a second. FT8 came out in June 29th of 2017, and because I was already operating FT8, I jumped on and started working it that first day that it came out. And it stands for Frank Taylor Design 8 FSK, so FT8. And as I said earlier, Joe and Steve were involved in designing it. It's very similar to JT65, but transmission time was half as long, 30 seconds instead of a minute of transmitting time. So typical QSO could be completed in about 2 minutes. And this really changed that. People who didn't want to sit there to go through a whole JT65, 4 minutes to make a contact, decided that maybe they would do it for FT8. FT8, although designed primarily for VHF, quickly gained popularity on HF also. It's a few dBs less sensitive than JT65, but the fact that it takes half as long meant that it was quickly adopted over most of the JT65. JT65 is still used for some things, moon mounts, etc., but it's not as common on HF as FT8 is now. The transmit sequence length is 15 seconds. The message length is 75 bits, and I'm not going to go through all the details on the screen here. And I'm getting local lightning, so hopefully my power will stay on. We're going through a little bit of a storm here tonight. FT4 came out last year on April of 2019, and it takes half as long again. So instead of half a minute, it took 15 seconds. I'm sorry, it took 7 seconds with 15 seconds for the complete turnaround between two call and response. So you could do a complete QSO in less than 1 minute. It was designed primarily for contesting, and it was not available last year for field day, but it will be available this year. They actually halted its operation during field day because it was just so new. It was still just a beta operation. So I think you'll hear a lot of FT4 this year on field day. Here's a little chart that shows you what type of dB signal is required to be able to carry on a conversation or two-way QSO. With single sideband, you want about a 10 dB above the noise. You notice here that with JT65 all the way down to minus 24 dB, FT8 and FT4 are a little bit less, but they still do a very good job in weak signal conditions. A lot of people have marginal antenna systems. Maybe they have a homeowners association doesn't allow outside antennas, or they have to use stealth antennas. One of the things is, even with an antenna like a magnetic loop antenna, you can compare that antenna very well with FT8 and FT4. One of the problems with the magnetic loop antenna is you're constantly having to readjust it because of the narrow bandwidth as you change frequency. But on FT8 and FT4, you set your radio on one frequency on each band, and once you're there on that band, you don't move it around. So this is a real good idea if you're in a situation where you can't have a permanently installed antenna. Something like a magnetic loop will work for FT8 and FT4 very well. Both FT8 and FT4 have multi-decoders, and they find all the FT8 signals or FT4 signals in the passband. So you tune to one passband and you decode all the signals that are there. Now, unlike JT65 and JT9, which used to both decode at the same time in the same screen, you have to change modes to operate FT8 or FT4. So both of them do not decode on the screen at the same time. So you have to choose one mode or the other to operate. You can't do both modes at the same time. They don't integrate. And because they change over so fast, you need to use auto sequencing. So as soon as you complete the other person's call, you need to be able to respond immediately. So I'll demonstrate that a little bit later, how the auto sequencing works. This is a layout of the FT8, I'm sorry, the WSJTX software. And WSJTX is the suite that has all these software packages in it. And this is what the screen looks like when you're operating FT4. You have a section of the screen that shows all the stations you're receiving and decoding. You have a section of all the stations that you're transmitting to, plus your transmissions. These are the people you're actually answering or answering you. You have the frequency you're on. You have the time and date. And then you have the auto sequencing area down here of what's going to be sent next. So in this case, I'm working an OE1 EWQ. And you can see right here, he sent that I was -21. I responded with your -3, and I sent an R in there, which means I got his -21. And he didn't get me, so I said it again. And he then responded, yes, you're now -15. And I did copy you. And that was the end of our QSO. At this point in time, we didn't finish it up. I would go on to say 73, but I fell out and it never finished up. So there's the screenshot. I have a video in here, and I'm not going to play the video right now because I'm going to actually do a live on-air demonstration, hopefully. But the video is there, so if you go through the slideshow later, you can watch the 3 or 4 minute video of a gentleman making a QSO. So let's talk about what FT8 and FT4 can do with 5 watts. And I only say with 5 watts because that's the way I operate, so that's what I can tell you what it'll do. You can get a little bit better performance if you up your power a little bit, but you'll be surprised at what you can do with even low power. Now, one thing that's important is you don't want to overheat your radio. So with a lot of radios, you can't run full power like you would with single sideband. This is a mode similar to RTTY where it's basically a key down all the time mode. So you don't want to overtax your equipment. Make sure that it can handle the heat that it might generate when it's transmitting. But you can run higher power. You don't need to run 5 watts like I do. So it took me 66 days to get my first worked all states with FT8. Less than 2 years, I have 8 band worked all states, and I'm a total of 8 contacts away from completing the other 3 bands for 11 band worked all states. In 122 days after I got FT4, I got my worked all states. And that's just because not only was I new to it, there weren't a lot of operators, but in the first week I had 39 states. Within 2 weeks, I had 45. And then it took me a couple of weeks to get the rest of them. DXCC, this is my current totals with my 5 watts. Actually, a couple of these went up today because I worked in New Country on 6 meters. I've worked approximately 14,000 FT8 and FT4 QSOs and another 2,000 and some of JT65. So I'm pretty close to 17,000 contacts with WSJTX. This is my example, my worked all states, my DXCC, and the total number of QSOs that I have with FT8 and FT4. I am going to switch over real quick, and I'm going to see if I can demonstrate a little bit of FT8 before I have to shut the antenna off because we are getting a lightning storm approaching. So I'm just going to bring it over here real quick and let you see what it looks like. So right now I'm on 6 meters. I'm going to change the band real quick. So on this side, we're going to see the stations as they're decoded. This is the band showing you what's going on. And I'm going to pick a spot where there's no one transmitting. These are all the stations that it just heard. And I'm going to try replying to this Portuguese station. So you should be able to hear the noise in the background pretty low. And you notice down at the bottom, this little window here tells me how long the transmission is. So on FT8, it's 15 seconds. He did not respond to me. He responded to a 6 here instead of me. But you can see some of the stations we're decoding. Here's an Albanian station, an LZ. We'll give it one more try here and see if he comes back to me. But if not, we're going to have to abandon the live demonstration because of the lightning approaching. Okay, he just sent 73 to the California station. So let's see if he comes back to me this time. He's a +6 dB. And we'll find out whether he comes back to me at the end of this 15 seconds here. And he did. So he answered me. So now it shows up in red. He said that I'm -15 dB. And I said, you're +2 dB. And I sent him a Roger to show them I got his 15. If everything goes according to plan here, he should send me a Roger to say he got my report. And that'll be the end of our contact. And of course, because the weather conditions are such and I wanted to hurry up, he did not hear me. So he sent me his -15 again. My -15, I should say. We'll give him another half a minute here to try this, see whether we can finish this up. If not, I will just have to cancel out of it. Oh, there he goes. He said he sent me in Roger 73. I'm going to click on this little log him button to log him. And there we go. And I've just completed a QSO with Portugal. So we'll go ahead and get that out of the way. And we'll go back to our presentation. I will quickly disconnect my antenna, so you'll have to pardon me reaching forward here. So that is an example of a quick WS JTX FT8 contact. And that way we'll get one in for sure, even if the storm continues here. Okay, all antennas have now been disconnected and we can return to our regularly scheduled slideshow. Let's get that out of the way. So, as I was saying, these are some of my totals. One of the really nice things about this is if you like E-skip, especially when there's no F propagation as we've been having the last couple of years, this is a great opportunity to work 6 meters, 10 meters, and 12 meters. And the last couple of days, that's what I've been doing. I've been working almost all 6 and 10. This morning, started off with some 6 to the south. And then this afternoon, I worked a bunch of Colorado and Washington state from here. So it was a good day on that. And this is a link, as I said earlier, you can read this whole little story that I wrote for our local newsletter on using FT8 on what should be most people consider a dead band. These are some of my QSOs that I made during this time period of 2 months. This is some of the DX in the worked all states that I did during this time period of 1 year. And you notice there was a peak during the summertime, which is often the case with some of the E-skip activity. So that's just an example of working what a lot of people would consider a dead band and also with some E-skip activity. This is my 160 contacts, as I mentioned earlier. In addition to 61 DXCC, I've worked all states on 5 watts on 160 with that little sloper antenna, and I've also worked all continents. My best DX so far has been 1,300 miles, 13,000 miles to a ZS, Siberia at 8,500 miles, and 6,600 miles to an E51, which is North Cook Island. And I mistakenly misread this when I was working him. I didn't realize, I thought it was an ES1, which would have been Estonia, which would have still been good on 160, but not quite as good at working in E51. So other things, it has automatic logging, as you saw, and I can transfer that to Logbook of the World or EQSL. So there's a much higher rate of QSLing, I think, with FT8 than you'll see with a lot of the other modes where people have to enter their information into a logbook manually. Can work with almost any radio that has USB, including VHF and UHF. What can you not do with FT8? What you can't do is you can't do rag chewing. You can't have long contacts as far as sending a lot of information. There is a program that you can do that sort of thing with. It's very similar. It's called JS8 Call, and it works on the same principle, but it has a more free text method to it. It's not quite as able to get all the information as you would with an FT4 or FT8 signal, but it does allow you to do longer conversations. So it also has some use potentially for emergency communication. You cannot work without a computing device. There's no radio out there right now that just does FT8 on its own. And I doubt whether you'll see one really, because of the nature of these modes changing all the time. They're very suited for having a computer. You could use a tablet though, or a Raspberry Pi. You don't have to have much of a computer to be able to do it. And it will not work with a CW only radio because you have to be able to do the tones. So that's the things that it can't do. This is my worked all states with 5 watts. You notice I have everything completed except for these 3 Alaskas, these 3 Hawaiis. I got this Washington this morning, so I've gotten this one off the board, and I still need 2 Montanas, and that will finish 11 bands worked all states on FT8 with 5 watts. This is my DXCC totals, how many bands. This number shows how many bands that I've worked each of these countries on. And my total's at 213 right now, I think. I'm going to skip through a few of these slides here. And then just as in fishing, in amateur radio, we also have the ones that got away. And this is one of the ones that got away from me. There's a system which I'll talk about a little bit later called PSK Reporter that lets you see where your signal is being received around the world. And one evening back in March of 2019, I was up in the middle of the night, 6:20 GMT, which would be 4 o'clock here. No, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I could see that there was a station receiving me in Antarctica, DP0 GVN. And this stayed at -6 dB. He was hearing me for over 20 minutes. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone was sitting at the seat, and the radio was just sitting there copying me. And unfortunately, I never did get this. So it was the one that got away. So I'm going to sort of change gears now. We're going to talk about what you need to do to set up an FT8 station and to operate. So you need an HF radio, a computer, you need a sound card or sound card interface, and in many cases it might be built into the radio already, so you don't need that separately. And you need some software, and the good news is all the software is free. As far as radio hardware, it needs to be an HF radio compatible with capable of single sideband transceive. And as I said, you can also do VHF, so it could be a VHF radio too. You need a sound card interface. Either you need a separate one if there's none in the radio. I'm sorry, if the radio has one of its own, you don't need a separate interface. An external interface, or some radios are designed so that you just connect cables between your radio and the computer's sound card. So you don't even need an interface. So I put together a little chart of current and in one case a future radio that's available. These are all radios that are under $2,000. Actually, most of them are under right around $1,000 or less. These are all radios that have built-in sound cards. So if you have any of these radios, you can immediately use a USB cable to hook it up to your computer and be able to operate these modes very, very simply after you get all the software configured. These are radios that don't have an internal sound card, so you would need some sort of sound card interface to operate these. These are radios that have enough isolation built into them that all you need to do is connect a cable directly from the audio cable directly from the radio to the sound card, either an internal or external sound card on your computer, and be able to operate. So for computer hardware, it will run under Windows, Linux, or OS X, and because it runs under Linux, you can also do it on Raspberry Pi. So it will run on Raspberry Pis also. One of the things I find useful is having a lot of monitor space, and I know a lot of people set this up on a laptop, and it gets very frustrating because when you see that screen I had up earlier, that was just part of my display I normally use when I'm operating FT8, and it gets a little crowded on the screen. The software, as I said earlier, WSJTX is the software suite, and it's free. There's also a couple of auxiliary helper programs that you can use. You don't have to have them. JT Alert, an Alarm JT, and another one which I'll talk about a little bit later called Grid Tracker are all free programs that work with WSJTX to give it some additional functionality. There's also online monitoring or spotting available from a website called PSK Reporter. You don't need to install anything. It's a website and does that for you from the website. Some miscellaneous stuff you might need: a USB cable, audio cables. You might want a Y splitter so that if you're feeding your audio from your computer from your radio into your computer, you might want to be able to hear it also. So you would need a splitter for headphones or for another speaker. Might need some microphone cables that match your radio, and you might need some DIN cables depending on what your radio's set up with port wise. These links take you out to the software. This is the link to download the software, and this is the user guide from the software. We'll just click on them real quick to show you what it looks like. This is the description of the software. You would go in here and pick the package of the software you want to install and go ahead and install it. This is the user's guide. And they do a very good job of keeping an online user's guide pretty up to date. You can just jump to any of the sections. Now, one thing I'm going to say about the user's guide, when you jump into it, it may be a little confusing because the user guide is for all of the 10 current modes, and they don't operate the same. So even though you might be interested in operating FT8 and FT4, this manual also has information on JT65, MSK 144. So there's a lot of information here you don't need to read about if you're only interested in 1 or 2 modes. So you need to set up the radio. And the most important thing I can say about this process is install the drivers supplied by the manufacturer on your computer before you connect your radio to your computer. If you connect your radio USB cable to the computer before you install the drivers, you will have nothing but problems. So I would strongly suggest you follow me up on that and always install the drivers before you connect the radio. After you do that, then you connect the radio to the computer, and then it will create a COM port on your radio, or in some cases 2 COM ports, and you'll need to know what number those are. You also want to test the COM ports to make sure they're working. And again, these are the radios I mentioned earlier. These are the type of interfaces you can use for the radios that don't have a built-in sound card. The Signal Link is very popular. There's one from MFJ, and there's also one that's available mostly in Europe, the ZLP, which Micro Pro SC, which looked very interesting. These are run about $100 each. There's some little more expensive ones like the West Mountain Rig Blaster, and then there's also some cheaper ones like the XGG comms. These are all interfaces that will work. I'm going to change gears for just a few moments here. We're going to interrupt our current presentation for some really geeky things. So if you're not interested in geeky things, you can ignore this part, but if you are, you can always come back to them later. So I have a whole video here you can watch on the basics of sound card interfaces to find out more about them, not just for FT8, but for other modes like PSK. I have a whole section here on a ham guide to interfaces. I have some information if you want to homebrew your own sound card interface. They're not that hard to do, and there's also some kits available out there. This is an example of one of the kits you can pick up on eBay for $9. It provides the isolation so that you don't get electrical signals between your radio and computer and cause damage to one or the other. This is an example of something called Easy Digi. It's basically the same thing we saw on the previous page, but now it's built and it's in a case. These still need a computer sound card interface. The sound card interface is not in there. This is just an isolation interface. I also included a link here and another link here and another link here. These 3 links all go out to a presentation by N6TV, Bob. And Bob has a presentation he did at Contest University called Everything You Need to Know About USB and Serial Interfaces. And even if you don't get involved in FT8 or FT4, these are invaluable for information on setting up any type of interface between your computer and your radio. And even if you have everything working already, I would suggest going through because he has a lot of tips. Like if you turn your computer on, your radio keys itself when your computer's booting up. He has information on how to get around that and how also to make your ports don't fall asleep in the middle of when you're operating. And this is the video of the same presentation you did at Contest University. This is not Bob. This is Tim K3LR, who was the MC for the presentations. Because you're tying up multiple COM ports, you might want a program that can share multiple COM ports with share your COM port with multiple computer programs. Maybe you're using a logging program, a contesting program, and there's a set of programs called Win4 suites, one for Elecraft, one for ICOM, and one for Yaesu that are available. And then there's also some free open source software called Null Modem Emulator, which allows you to set up a share your COM ports with multiple programs. This is a whole presentation on virtual audio cables. If you're using a software-defined radio, you might need to set up virtual audio cables to replace the physical audio cables you normally run between your radio and your computer. So that was the geeky stuff, and you could go back and look at it later if you'd like. We're now going to return to our regularly scheduled program on FT8 and FT4. So what I've done here is I've collected some helpful resource links on setting up these radios. So I have the 7300. I also have some other ICOMs. I have the FT891 because I just set up one for a friend this last week. The 991, the Kenwood 590, and the K3 and the KX2 and KX3. There's information on most modern radios, but these are the ones I have gathered together here that are very common. The 7300 is pretty much the same as setting up the 7600 also. If you need a sound card and there's not one built into your radio, I suggest that you might want to consider an external sound card. The advantage of this is you're probably using your sound card in your computer right now for things like playing YouTube videos or listening to Zoom tonight. If you try and use the same sound card in your computer for your radio to run these modes, what will happen is inadvertently, you will end up sending the audio from your computer into your radio, not of the program they're trying to do, but of the background music that's playing or the Windows sounds when you open things up. So I suggest a second sound card, and even a cheap little external one of these little $6 devices will work just fine. If your radio has a built-in sound card, you'll need to install the driver software, and then you'll need to connect usually with a USB cable. If it doesn't have a internal sound card, you'll need to hook up the interface in between the two. And for that, you'll want to follow the manufacturer's instructions. In all cases, make sure that your radio or interface sound card is not designated as the default sound card for your computer. Again, what'll happen is when you go to YouTube, it'll end up playing the audio into your radio, and that's not what you want to do. So make sure that it's not set up that way in your sound control panels, depending on what operating system you're using. You want to set your computer's internal sound card, the one that you're not using for WSJTX, as the default device, so you can continue to use your computer for sound. You need to install the WSJTX software, and as I said, this is a link to the installation programs. I also mentioned earlier that you need to install some sort of time syncing software, and these are the two most popular, the Meinberg NTP and the Dimensions 4. And these are both free packages, and they will allow you to use your internet link to sync your computer up for high time synchronization. If you're operating in the field where you do not have internet access, you can use a USB GPS device to do this, or any type of external GPS device that you can hook up to your computer will allow you to do this syncing in the field. I was working in Delaware for Field Day 2 years ago, and we stayed for the week after Field Day, and I wanted to give Delaware out to people as an FT8 contact because it was a pretty rare state. And we were staying at a cabin with no internet access, so I had to drive about 5 miles away to the McDonald's, drive through the drive-through, and while I was there, I used it to sync my time again on my laptop so that I'd be ready to operate when I got back. I had to do that 3 times during the week to keep my time synced because I did not have a USB GPS device with me. So the next thing after installing the software is you have to configure it. And I set this up showing you pretty much step by step what we're going to do. We're going to go into the file window. We're going to go to the settings. And in there, there's tabs all the way across the top. You need to set up each of these tabs, and you can use pretty much the default settings I have in the presentation here will work. Some of these things don't really have much effect, or some of these things have nothing to do with FT8. They're involved in the other modes like the EME bounce, moon bounce that you use with JT65. So you need to put your call sign, your grid square, and then a few of these you might want, but you don't need to have any of them. On our next tab, the radio tab, that'll depend on what radio you're using. And this drop down menu allows you to pick from a wide variety of radios. It also has the rig, I forget the generic rig control program and the ham library control program. So there's some generic programs in there for radios that don't have support. You need to set your COM port and your baud rate and all your data settings. This depends on what your radio is. You then need to choose how you're going to key your microphone. So key your audio on your radio. I'm using cat control. The other most common way is to use Vox control, depending on what type of interface you're using. Next thing you need to do is set up what your audio source is going to be. Whether if it's a computer, I'm sorry, if it's a sound card in your radio, it's probably going to say something like USB audio codec. And most radios don't distinguish their names. So one thing I strongly suggest is after you install this, you can go in and actually change this name in your Windows settings so that it might say something, for example, Elecraft USB, because I have USB codecs for Elecraft, ICOM, and Kenwood all on my computer, and they all look the same. So I've went in and renamed each one so I know which one I'm using. Make sure again that your sound card input and output are not your computer's internal sound card. You don't want it to say default device here either. You want to specifically say which device you want to use. This is kind of hard to see, but this just talks about how Windows control panel settings are set up for your playback and record devices. And let me just mention real quick here, the playback device will be the outgoing signal from your computer to your radio. The recording device will be the incoming sound from your radio to your computer sound card. And again, you can look at this slide when you download the presentation and look at it in detail later. After you have those parts of the program configured, you're pretty much ready to operate. I also suggest that you install JT Alert, which is a little helper program, and we'll talk about that later. And there's also some resources in here on how to set this up that I have some links with good either videos or presentations on how to set this up. You also need to make sure your time sync software is running. Again, here's the link to the time sync software. Skip that screen. Before you start your WSJTX software, always make sure that you have two things set up. And this isn't just the first time, this is every time you go to use it. Always make sure you have all the connections done beforehand, all the USB cables connected to your radio and your computer. If you have an external sound card, make sure it's plugged in, and make sure you have your radio turned on first. If you don't do these things, WSJTX is going to say, oh, I couldn't find the right configuration you have set up. Would you like to change your configuration? And you'll end up with the wrong configuration. So always make sure that you have all your USB devices connected and your radio turned on before you start your software up. Now, if you have different radios, you can set up multiple configurations so that you can just switch between them. So let me just bring this back over here again real quick, and I'll show you that I actually have configurations for a variety of different radios. And when I would go there, that will automatically change all my settings to operate with that radio. If you're moving it to another computer, you can also copy these files from your WSJTX folder and just move those files over, and it will reconfigure your new computer with that information. If things stop working after you've gotten everything working, the most likely problems are the computer sound card settings have been changed. And the most notorious thing for doing this is when Windows does updates, sometimes it'll decide to change your default sound cards or drivers. And if that happens, it can really cause havoc. The other most common reason why things are not working is your time synchronization is out. Let me just drag this back over here for a second to show you again. This column here that says DT on the top shows you how much difference there is between your station and the other station's sound card. So you notice the station I worked before was 0.1 second difference. So that's great. Most of these are pretty close to that. This one was 0.4. That was about the furthest out. If it gets way out, you'll start seeing this show up in red. Not the whole thing, but just the distance time. And if it starts showing up in red, I'm guessing that not everyone else has the wrong time. You probably have the wrong time, and you probably need to check your time synchronization. The other thing that can happen sometimes is your radio won't change modes when you change it on WSJTX, and it'll be on the wrong mode. It might be on CW instead of on your data mode. And then the last thing, and this is what I just helped a friend do, he had his bandwidth set too narrow. You want to open your bandwidth up to the maximum filter, because you're going to be looking at the whole passband at one time. When we were making that contact earlier, we were decoding all the stations in a 3000 KC section of the band. So this is a layout of WSJTX. At the top, you have menus here. And if the menus go away, that's because you accidentally unchecked the little box that says menus down here. So if you don't have menus, just check this box again. This is the messages that are coming in. These are the stations that are being received. These are the stations you're working. This is the band you're on. This is the current frequency. This is your enable transmit and the halt transmit. And this is the mode you're currently on. I'm going to bring this over and actually show you how to do some of these things on the actual screen. So if you want to change mode, you go up the mode and you choose between FT4 and FT8 or JT65 or whatever you want. That's all you do to change modes. If you want to change bands, you come down here and click on this, and all the bands are already in here with the right frequency. You just pick the band you want, and that'll change it to that band. Now my radio is turned off because I disconnected everything, so it's not going to cooperate and change bands here, probably. It won't do that. Okay, that's fine. And see, it's telling me your radio is not there. See what I told you about? You always want to have your radio on ahead of time. Get that out of the way also. Okay. So this is how you change frequency. You can also type in a frequency. The only time you're going to need to do this is if a station is a DX station, it's working at different segments, so it's not tying up the rest of the band. So if you're working the South Shetland station or South Georgia station a couple months ago, you would need to type in this frequency. There's 3 boxes in the middle of the screen that you always want to keep checked: hold transmit frequency, call first, and auto sequence. And one of the things that's hard for people to realize is you want to keep your transmit frequency stayed the same. You don't want to keep changing it to follow the stations around. You want to find a clear spot in the band scope. That's where you want to transmit. Everyone's seeing all the signals, so you don't need to line yourself up. You don't need to zero beat the station you want to work. And that's one of the mistakes that a lot of people do. They'll turn this off. And if they turn this off, every time they click on a station to operate, it will change their transmit frequency to match the station's frequency. And you don't want to do that. Auto sequence means that after you receive a reply to your call, it'll automatically send the signal report to the other station. So you want that on. And call first is necessary when you're calling CW. When you're calling CW, if you have call first checked, it will answer the first station that replies to you. Now you can turn this off if you want to pick who you're going to answer, but you got to be pretty quick on double clicking on them to answer them in a matter of seconds. So as I said earlier, when you're setting up the transmit, before you transmit, you want to pick the spot by right clicking on this band scope, and then it'll give you this little set, receive, and transmit frequency. And that's where you'll do it. So you find a clear spot on the band map. This is a little bit closer up picture showing the sequence of events on a receive window. So right here, this gray dotted line, the dotted line in the gray says that this is the beginning of a receive session. So what's happening here is the radio is receiving these stations for the first time during this time period, and they will then list all the stations that decode. They'll all come up at one time for the most part. And you can see the first column is the time. The second column is the signal strength. The third column is the difference in time between your time sync and theirs. The next one is the relative position they're at frequency wise. So if we're on 20 meters at 14.074, this is 14.074334. This is 14.075651. So it's the relative frequency. This station, the next column is the stations. The station on your left is the station that you're not hearing. The station you're hearing is the one on the right. So in this case, we're hearing Delta Lima 8 MRE, and he's talking to JE1 AEX. And his signal is -1 that he's sending the signal to the station. This person's calling CQ, this E20 WXK. We could double click on him to work him. This station is calling CQ, but he's grayed out. The reason why he's grayed out is my program keeps track of who I've worked before, and that's the station I've already worked. So it's saying you've already worked this person, you really don't want to work him again, so it grays it out. This is another station calling CQ, this N4 ULE. So I could double click on him. His signal is very strong here. He's 6+, so there's a very good chance I could work him. The other thing it shows after the station's call sign is the grid square that they're in. So again, when we set our grid square back in the settings, that's what's transmitted when we send out our information. This is an example of 2 stations in a QSO. We're hearing UA3. He is sending 73 to this French station, F5 station. Again, the station on the left is not the one we're receiving. The one on the right is the one we're receiving. This is the receive frequency section. This is the stations that we're working. So in this case, I'm calling CQ, and W8SIC responded to me. And the way he responds is he sends my call, and his grid square. And again, that's all auto sequence. So when he double clicked on me, his computer program sent that automatically to his radio. I responded with my call sign saying you're +12. He responded with Roger, I received your +12 and you're -10 here. I then sent 73, and that was the end of our contact. He sent 73 also, but it doesn't show up on my screen here because I stopped recording when I got to that point. But that is what it means. That's the whole contact. And you'll notice that I had originally set myself to CQ. I clicked my enable button. I had call first checked, and it went through the sequence automatically, and all this happened. Let's say you want to answer a CQ. We look for a CQ to double click on over here, and I found one. I found this K4. I double clicked on them up here. I then transmitted in yellow here. See where I'm transmitting. I sent my call to him. He responded, so it showed up in red where he sent me a signal that I was -20. We're seeing it both places here. That's what I want to show you. Both places the same signal. After he responded -20, I sent back an R, and I said you're +5. He said he then sent me a 73, and then I sent him a 73, and we were all done. So that's a complete contact when you're answering a CQ. And that's pretty much how the contacts go. Now, there's a couple special settings that you need to do under the Advanced tab. There's special operating modes for Fox and Hound. That's what's used by DX stations. And the DX station is the Hound. You are the Fox. Is the Fox. You are the Hound. And when you're in the Fox and Hound mode, the DX station can reply to multiple stations at the same time. So you don't have to wait for one cycle to work each station. They could answer 6 stations that are calling them at the same time. For field day, you're going to need to go in, if you want to do that, and change the special operating mode. Click the little button, then choose ARRL field day, and then you need to put in your field day exchange. So if you want to use FT8 or FT4 for field day, this is what you need to do. And that's all new in the last year to be able to let you do that easily for field day. So a couple operating tips: reduce your power settings so you're not overdriving your radio and overheating it. Make sure your radio's filtering is set as wide as possible. And make sure all speech processing, noise blanking, etc. is turned off. These are some of the helper programs available. PSK Reporter will show you all the signals that are being heard on the air. And I'll bring up PSK Reporter to show you a real live version of it here. This is PSK Reporter, and it's looking at the last 2 hours. I'm going to tell it I want to see the last 24 hours of my activity. What this is every station that's using the WSJTX software has the option of checking a little button on there that says send my data via the internet to PSK Reporter and have it display. So by saying that I'm looking for everyone who's hearing KZT, these are all the stations that are hearing me around the world. I'm not necessarily working them, they're hearing me. And it's showing me how strong they're hearing me. So 34 minutes ago, when I was working that other station, there was a station in Siberia that heard me at -5. So when I was working the other station, and if you hover your mouse over, it'll give you the details on the station. So here's a station in Puerto Rico. Again, this is not stations that you've worked. These are stations that are hearing you. So it's a great way to tell what propagation's like without even having anyone answer you. That's called PSK Reporter. One question that comes up quite often is, where's your log? You go to File, Open Log Directory, and this is the log file for this program. As I said earlier, JT Alert is a helper program that provides audio and visual alerts. It'll also look up call signs and give you the name and state for the call sign that it's hearing. And I wish I could demonstrate this right now live, but I can't because the lightning is proceeding to continue here. Also, it allows you to have your logging go to another program instead of the WSJTX log. You can have it go to an external logbook program. And it also has the ability to upload your QSOs to online logbook. So if you want a logbook use club log or HDR log, it can automatically push your contacts there without you having to do it manually. And this is what it looks like. This bottom screen is the is the JT alert, and this is the WSJTX up here. And you'll notice that it shows the call signs of each station the same way that they're displayed here, but it shows it in these boxes. And you can have up to 36, I think actually 40 boxes down here that'll show. It then does the lookup by using one of those online databases that tells me that James here, the K4 station, is in Panama City. His grid is being what he's transmitting, but it also looks up and finds out that he's in Florida. So it tells me all that information. So notice here that there's this 5 transmitting up here, this N5KU. Down here, it's used the lookup ability to tell me he's in Texas. So this program is very handy to have, this JT Alert. JT Alert also supports texting via the internet. This isn't across the radio, but if you want to chat a little bit longer with someone who you're talking to, you can use this chat texting ability built into JT Alert as long as the other person's using it on their side. I have another program here called Ham Spots, which I'll talk about in a moment, but these are all links for information on these programs. This is what the Ham Spots looks like. It's more of a text-based as opposed to a map. Grid Tracker is a graphic program that'll show you where you're making contacts. And the rest of everything I have left is I have some additional homework for you. I have some reading for you to read, and you can read through this at your leisure. This is a quick start guide that I put together. This is basically all the screenshots that I have in the slideshow, but they're put together into a single document, so they're much easier to have handy. This is a great thing to print out and have handy when you're just starting out operating, so you know what the screens represent all the way through. I have a thing on using PSK Reporter. And then I have a bunch of links from people, including some videos and some websites and some handy guides on using FT8 and FT4. And that is the end. So we're ready for questions. And I made it in just about an hour.
Anthony, excellent. What a great presentation. And also thank you for telling me the ZA Albanian station was on. And while you were presenting, I used my my main station rig, and that was my number 149 DXCC on FT8. So that was a nice bonus.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. See, that's the thing that happens. We have a little spotting network set up here for our 4 of us locals that operate all the time, and we're constantly texting each other the spots that come up too. So I can add you to the list if you like, George. I can get you DXCC on any band in a couple of minutes here.
No, that's okay. Anyhow, well, excellent presentation. I don't want to take anything away, and I want to make sure we get to questions. I just wanted to add that several of the logging programs offer the ability to integrate the software into the existing logging program software, so it automatically goes into your main logging program. And in the logging program I use, there's even another little helper program that does an automatic upload to Logbook of the World, which serves 2 purposes. One is it gets the QSO into the Logbook of the World right away. And the second one is when you're running electronic logs, it's really good to have offsite backup. And of course, Logbook of the World gives you an electronic backup of your logbook. So if you're more of a hardcore DXer like I am, that's another way to look at it. And I ran more power than Anthony. I was running a whole 50 watts on that one. So with that, if you have any questions, please unmute your mic and please ask away.
Yeah, and let me just go add to George's thing real quick. I'm doing the same thing. I'm using a program called Logic by PDA Software, but Ham Radio Deluxe also works with it. So there's a number of programs that have the ability to do the direct suck-in of the contacts on the WSJTX.
Yeah. Okay, questions, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead, Richard, unmute and please go ahead. Go ahead, Richard, unmute. You have to unmute yourself. Charlie Oscar 5, Fox Mike.
I have to enable that.
Oh, we haven't oh. Go ahead, Augusto.
¿Me escucha?
Hey, there we go. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah. Si algún colega me ayuda en la traducción, porque no domino bien el inglés, quisiera hacerle una pregunta.
Ok, yo te puedo ayudar.
Anthony. Ok, gracias, igual. Mi pregunta es la siguiente. Yo vi que él enseñó cómo el programa te dice los contactos que ya has tenido anteriormente en gris, pero no explicó cómo eso se configura. Si pudiera al menos decir cómo se logra esa configuración para poder hacerlo en mi programa, porque no sé cómo hacerlo. Gracias.
Okay,
thank you.
perfect. Anthony, the question he has is he says you showed in the program all previous contacts are grayed out or are in gray. How do you configure the program to do that?
Yeah, let me show you how to do that real quick here. Now I'm using the JT Alert as my overriding, but you can do it without JT Alert by using some of the features within the program. But I'm using JT Alert to do it. But I'm going to bring up FT8. Hopefully, I'm going to bring it up here.
Ok, él va a hacer la demostración de cómo lo hace y dice que él usa un programa que se llama JT Alert, pero que no necesariamente se tiene que usar ese programa.
Ok. Interesante.
Let me get it to cooperate here. When the lightning went through, it caused a number of issues here, so I had to get everything restarted here real quick. While we're waiting for that to come up, let me get the screen share started here. Okay, it's going to take a second for me to get it to come back up here. Okay, now it should work. As I said earlier, always make sure you have your radio on or unpleasant things will happen.
You are not sharing the screen just in case.
No, I'm trying to get this program to come up here and it's not cooperating. Actually, it's hogging up all my screens here. Okay. My Zoom screen went away somewhere. I may have to leave the meeting and come back in here again because it's not letting me get to my Zoom controls at all.
Okay, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we have another question and you can sort of work on that in the background, Anthony.
Okay, I'm gonna leave the meeting though and come back in. So let me in, Augusto. Okay.
Okay, hang on a minute.
Okay. Ramón, tu volumen está muy bajo, no te escuchamos.
Yeah.
Richard va a volver a entrar.
No.
Va a volver a entrar para que se le trabó la computadora.
Bueno. El problema es que en este software es tan rápido que si uno puede tener el conocimiento de que esa estación ya fue trabajada, pues es mucho mejor.
Sí,
porque
ahora lo va a exponer, nada más salió y vuelve a entrar para poder compartir la pantalla porque se le trabó.
O sea, comparten, que es una buena pregunta. O sea,
sí, claro que sí.
Es una cosa interesante de cómo hacerlo.
Un momentito. Y qué gusto tener.
Gracias. Thank you.
Okay, do we have another question while we're waiting here? We have Ramon and I are both have both been using quite a bit of FT8. We might be able to answer some of the easy ones.
And then should be back in now. Just in case.
Okay. The other thing is if you need to unmute yourself, the space bar is a push to talk button. So if you hold the space bar down, it's like a push to talk switch.
Okay, I should be okay now.
Yes.
Roger.
Fine.
Okay, and you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so let's go to the configuration real quick under File, Settings. You can set all the colors here. You can turn these on and off. You can also change the colors you want. It has everything like a new CQ zone, a new state, a new country. It'll alert you to those with those special colors. But if you just have the one set that says new work before, it will do that for you. It will mark the ones as work before.
Hay que ir al menú de settings y,
Yes.
luego a colores, y luego hay que ir, en este de colores hay uno de estaciones que ya se trabajaron, y entonces le pone uno ahí, le marca, y lo marca en un color diferente para que ya se identifique fácilmente y saber que ya se trabajó.
And then the other place you want to check is right here. Actually, it's not in there. But I'm also doing the settings through my JT Alert. So I'm setting up what I want to be shown here too. So I'm using the JT Alert to do the coloring also.
También utiliza otro programa que se llama JT Alert, y ahí
Yes.
también tiene un esquema de colores.
So I saw the other question I saw that popped up real quick was I saw someone ask a question about the about older radios. This is a Ten-Tech Argonaut from 1973, a 509. And I'm using a computer interface, and it took me about 10 minutes to make my first FT8 contact on it. You don't have to be able to control the frequency. If you set the frequency with the dial on the radio, you can operate because it doesn't really have to be able to change every time. As long as you're willing to change your frequency to the right spot manually, you can use older radios. So it doesn't have to be something with computer control even.
Anthony, I have a question.
Yes, go right ahead.
As a QRPer, you obviously want to have the minimum setup. What will be the minimum and the smallest setup to be able to do FT8 while traveling, for example? Of course, using a loop antenna or some simple antenna, but what would be on the radio side?
Well, you could even go with something as simple as, let me bring it up here real quick. This QRP guys, I'm sorry, this phaser single band kits, they're $55. You can put this kit together. You plug this directly into your sound card on your laptop and you'd be ready to go.
Super.
This is a single band radio. You pick the band you want. There's even a little bit cheaper kit. It's a double single sideband though. So there's some issues with double single sideband. If you're looking to buy a new radio that has a sound card in, one of the ones that sometimes is available for under $700 is the ICOM 7100. I'm using a KX3, which is very portable, but it's a QRP radio. And I use that for field day with one of those external sound cards and just plug a cable between the audio output of that and the radio, and it works just fine. And I'm using it with a tablet actually, so I have more battery power for field day.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to give us a speech about QRP one of these days, only
Well,
QRP.
I'll be happy to do that. I have one of those available, so I can always do that.
Okay, are there other questions? If so, please unmute and ask.
I lost the chat window, so Gustav, if there's any questions on the Yahoo chat, I mean the YouTube chat.
No, we haven't had any questions on YouTube,
Okay.
But I do have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is, are you familiar with JTVX, which is a different program for doing FT8 and FT4, which is the one I'm using?
Yeah,
And if so,
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't really used it, so I don't really know much about it. because it's open source, there's a variety of different programs out there. And let me just mention one other one. I don't know what program it is, but there's someone is, because it's open source, has taken and ported the WSJTX to a multi-user, to a multiple station type of thing where someone can be where they can be working multiple stations at the same time. I don't know the details on that, but you'll sometimes see stations like there's a 5 Tango. He'll be working multiple people at the same time without using Foxhound mode. So he's got a modified version of the software that he's using.
Yeah, there's two there. I think that's the one that's JT8 call. And Augusto, I can help you on JTDX because that's the one that I use. It uses the WSJT engine, and they've just made some changes around the functions around it so that it is a bit more oriented towards DXers. Other than that, it's almost the same. For example, the setting screen that you saw, you just finished showing, that's the same setting screen you see in JTDX.
Yeah, my question is because that's the one I use. I'm also kind of familiar with it, but I was wondering if there were any real big differences between WJTX and or JTDX. That was the reason for my question. And the other question is, are you familiar with the new ICOM QRP radio? I don't know what the number is.
The IC705.
Okay.
And it should have a sound card built into it. So you should be able to use that for that aspect. And it has VHF and UHF in it. So it should be a good one for like the ARRL VHF contest. But it won't have any more features other than that, because that's the thing. No one's really putting features in the radio for these modes. Now, I can't tell you what manufacturer, but a manufacturer contacted me recently. They're coming out with a new radio that has the number 4 at the end of it. And they are adding features for WSJTX in the radio. Not to be able to necessarily operate, but to possibly do copying as a propagation tool.
That's interesting. And regarding using a QRP radio versus, for example, that 705 or the 7300, heat-wise, is it better to have, I mean, if you have to choose between one or the other, you use a 7300 with 10 watts, is it going to be easier on the radio than using a QRP radio at full power? Let's say a 75 at 10 watts?
If you look here at my radio that I'm using, my KX3, I actually, you can't see this one. I don't have it on, but I have an external heatsink that I have on my one radio to operate. But I'm still only operating 3 watts here, so it's not a problem even with the standard heatsink on this. This is my tablet. This is my field day station. I'm operating. This is my phone and CW radio in this box. But then this other KX3 here is my FT8 station that I'm operating with this tablet. And here's my sound card right here. It's a StarTech external sound card, USB sound card plugged into my tablet. So that's a real quick operation. OH8STN, the Nordic survival guy, he runs a Pi station where he uses a Pi with a tablet that he's using VNC with. So he has just a Pi is his computer for the program, and then he's using a tablet for his display, and he has some really good things on there. And he runs the JT call on there is what he uses, but it's very similar. Other questions? Would you like to see another couple contacts? I can do that real quick here because it is cooperating right now. We have a live station that Lightning has finally left me. Here's a VU station that's calling, but he's minus 24. So my chances of working him are really limited with my 5 watts. Oh, this is interesting. This is a station here calling CQ, and he puts in Rhode Island. So he's calling CQ Rhode Island. This is the way you want to do it. You don't want to put it after your call sign or it'll mess everything up. You always want to stick to the standardized way of listing your station here. And you would do that by coming down the little drop-down menu and putting in the thing you want, or by typing in here, like I want Montana, I could type in MT in front of that and do it that way. So it's very important that you don't do fancy ways of doing it. Do it the way everyone does it. That way it'll display correctly on the screen. That station that people were doing originally with the special event station from New York with the / county name was causing all sorts of issues because it wasn't a standardized abbreviation that they were using, and it was coming up as Egypt. When they were running Suffolk County, it came up as Egypt. I was all excited, and it wasn't Egypt. You can see right now that we're getting a wide variety. I just swung the antenna around a little bit to the north, and we're starting to get some propagation to Asia. I saw a UN station there. Here's a Peru station here, FT4 DOH.
An XC1KK.
Yep.
I wonder who that could be.
I'm pointing out the exact opposite way from here, but we'll swing the beam around and see what happens here.
Ahí está su Ramón.
The thing I didn't do is I didn't do the thing you have to do. That's find a clear spot before I called him. So he may not have heard me that time. I'm going to show this real quick because I didn't get a chance to show this before. This is the band map here, the waterfall. And when you want to pick a clear spot, you right click on it and then you choose set to your receive spot, and that'll pick out your spot. So I'm not transmitting on top of someone. So my signal is also not being covered up by someone else. So I'm calling XE1KK right now, and he's not hearing me yet because he's working an N5 station here. I'm still not turned far enough south for him.
As soon as I hear you, I caught him.
You notice there's a Cuban station calling a ZL. There's a 6 station calling a ZL. So we'll probably start seeing the ZLs here in a little while.
I don't copy.
I need to find a little clearer spot. I'm in a little bit too much traffic there. You're both -10.
Ken, while they're there showing us their live
Yes.
contacts, are there any other questions? Any other questions?
Now, by attending tonight's session, you are required to make contact with it when you see me on your display. It's required. We got a question on the chat here. He's talking about seeing the same call 3 times. And what happens on that is sometimes when you decode, you'll get multipath decoding taking place. So there'll be a slight delay in one of the signals you're hearing. So you'll actually end up with multiple displays on the decode, even when it's the same station. There we go.
Yep, it worked.
How much power are you running there?
10 watts.
10 watts. Okay. And I'm, so you're -13, I'm -8. So that, so you're -8, I'm -13. That's about right. You're -8. So yeah.
I'm using a step IR antenna aimed probably about where you are.
And don't worry about if your signal reports are real low. That doesn't matter.
The contact is made.
So there we go. The contact came up, and it would have went in my log automatically if my log was up and running, which I forgot to do.
That's my first contact with you too.
Yes. Now let's take a look at the WSJTX. I'm sorry, the PSK reporter. And we'll narrow it down to just the last 15 minutes here. So you can see. You can see your connection right there. And you must not have PSK reporter operating right now because you didn't record my signal.
Yeah, I don't have
my
it up.
signal.
I think that's an important thing to show people how to.
Yeah, I can show
record,
that.
because I think it's a very useful tool.
Yeah, let me flip screens here. So you go into the settings and then you go into reporting and you go right here, enable PSK reporter spotting. And that's where you turn it on. Now, this is also the way that if you're using N1MM or other programs, this is the way that it communicates with other programs through this UDP server setup. But this is all you need to do to have PSK reporter working, is just check this little box right here. So I just changed the 6 meters here. We'll see if anyone's. No, I'm just hearing a bunch of noise. $17 meters. Oh, let me show FT4 here real quick. So we're going to go up here and we're going to switch from FT8 to FT4. By the way, this was my suggestion that they change colors on this. They used to both be blue. Now it's bright pink to let me know without having to fumble through it. So you're going to see now, instead of being 15 seconds, it's only going to be 7 seconds long on the transmission. It's actually not a full 7 seconds. It's 6 point something.
Yeah, show the waterfall, Anthony.
Yeah. Now the stations will be wider now because the signals are wider in FT4. So it actually takes up a little more bandwidth. And you can't hear the sound of the station. Let me bring it up to the microphone here. You're not gonna be able to hear it, but they have a different tone, so you can actually get used to the fact that there's different tones. So there's I can't swing my antenna around far enough the back way to get Trinidad here. I think he's with us tonight also, is he not? Is 9 Zulu 4 Delta Zulu with us?
Today, we have 2 or 3 people from Trinidad tonight.
I saw 19 Zulu, but the problem is my beam is swung around to the south, and I really need to be to the southeast, so I can't. I'd have to crank it all the way around here. We'll see if we get him with it. Now because FT4 does not quite have is not quite as good as low decibel wise, there is one advantage to it. Sometimes when you have signals that are fading in and out, with this, because it's a quicker signal, sometimes you'll be able to complete the contact. So just because it's not as able to dig out weak signals as FT8, sometimes I find FT4 is better. Other times it's just the opposite. The signals are just a little too weak for FT4 and you're beating your head against the wall, not making any contacts. But a lot of times I'll see the fact that with quick fading, I'll actually make a contact easier with FT4.
Just a quick comment.
Yes.
There's a colleague on YouTube, Carlos Alberto, and his call sign is Charlie Oscar 2 Juliet Charlie. He's sending his regards to Ramon, to George, to Anthony, and all the colleagues from EMCOR in Cuba.
Okay.
Manda sus saludos para todos los colegas de EMCOR, Carlos Alberto, Charlie Oscar 2, Juliet Charlie.
He's the emergency communication coordinator for Cuba.
Yeah, unfortunately he could not join on Zoom. I don't know what happened. He wasn't able to join Zoom.
I just switched over to 30-meter FT4, and unfortunately there is a PSK station that's plopped itself right in the middle of the FT4 portion of the band. So we'll switch back over to FT8. So there's an Oscar Delta 5 there. So what this is showing here is this is a station that's new for me on this band. That's why it's in pink. You can adjust the colors the way you want. I use my colors slightly different. I have my CQs all showing up in green on here. I just find it easier to read that way. It's not the default color, but that's the way I have it set up. So we're going to call this this KR0P. He's in Nebraska. He was +8. Should be able to work them pretty easily. And there he answered me on the first call. So he was +14 here. So he sent me a -11. I sent him a +14 with a Roger at it. Now the joke used to be with JT65, you had time to get up and get a cup of coffee and come back. With FT8 and FT4, you only have a chance to drink the coffee. You don't have a chance to go make it. Well, I'm going to shut the station down because the lightning is reappearing here. So is there any other questions I can show real quick before I shut this off? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that.
Anthony,
Yes.
will these presentations plus that 7-page quick start be available for download?
Yes, they're available. They're actually the presentation is a Google slideshow. It's not really. I keep it that way because it's live, so that it's the most common up to date. If you need one as a PDF for some reason, let me know. I've had a couple of people with vision issues that have needed them that way. But again, the link to this is tiny.cc/FT8 FT4. When you type it right, got to put the other T in there. This is the link to the slide presentation. Oh, and this slide presentation is also available on the ARRL library, the library page. Scott Bickle, Chris Bickle just put it there about 2 weeks ago. So if you go to the ARRL webpage and go to the library section, the reference library, which a lot of people I don't think know about. And I can't even find it right now.
Yes, and of course, this presentation will be up and available on YouTube.
So here's the ARRL library, and it's ARRL/library, and these presentations that are available, it's in here as one of the presentations. I think it's under the PDFs, even though it isn't a PDF. Maybe not. So I know it's there, but I don't see it right at this moment. Oh, it's under the guides. Here's where it's at. That's the guide lines. That's not the guides, but it is here. But I don't see it right now. Oh, there we go. Okay, it's under. You got to click the resources button, and this is it right here. It's the same presentation with a few slides missing. They were going to put a PDF there, but the problem is I keep updating this, so I'd rather keep it updating because it's a moving target. With FT4 being less than 14 months old, it's surprising how many people are operating this modes. I mean, it's really remarkable how fast these have caught on. And I think a lot of people are going to discover the eSkip advantage this summer with 6 and 10 and 12. So I think you'll see a lot of activity on FT8 and FT4, both on those higher bands. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions.
Any other questions? Last chance, folks. Okay, well, if that's the case, then thank you very much for attending. I hope you found the presentation useful. Anthony, thank you very much. You've now done 2 weeks in a row on 2 very different things, and we're very useful. The feedback we're getting is extremely positive. So thanks very much. We appreciate you taking the time to do it. And for those of you who also speak Spanish, next week we're having the same subject matter, Espanol. And for those of you who don't speak Spanish, you can attend and see how much Spanish you can learn, like I will do.
And I hope he doesn't have lightning at his location like I did tonight. I apologize for the couple quick panicked lightning passes here. Things have calmed down now, fortunately. It seems like the beam is still up in the air, so that's the good news.
Use the opportunity to say this in Spanish for a second. Para los colegas que quieren escuchar la presentación que ha hecho Anthony ahora en inglés, la próxima semana Pablo Vázquez o A4 Alfa India va a hacer la misma, digamos, utilizando el material de Anthony, va a hacer la presentación de FT8 en español, FT8, FT4. Thank you. I was telling everybody who's a Spanish speaker that we will be using your presentation next week for a Spanish version of it.
Very good. Thank
you very much, Anthony. It's been a great presentation, very informative, and I was able to make a new contact, which is great.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you very much. 7-3. Have a good evening. Please stay safe and disconnect those antennas from the lightning. Good night.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Good night.
Buenas noches.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Good night. 7-3. Thank you.
Good night to all. 73.
Robbie.
Rafael.
Hello, good night.
Okay, good night all.
Good to see you there.
All the best. Take good care. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Ravi.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios.
Alex, I could feel you waving that paper. That fan you had, I could feel it all the way over here. It must be hot there.
Here it is getting cold now. Finally, winter is kicking in here.
We had 93 yesterday, and the day before yesterday, and 90 something today.
You're lucky. I hate winter. I hate it.
We went from 40 to 90 without nothing in between.
Winter is not too bad in here. We only get to 14, 13 degrees centigrade. I don't know what's that. High 50s, I think.
Yep.
But it's very humid. And now with the COVID, it's bad news because it's when the epidemic is going to get even worse, which it already is pretty bad in here, but it's part of the process. Nothing much we can do but just be very, very safe as much as possible. But people are not being safe in here. It's getting to be very bad.
Anthony, I have a question. Should
Yes.
we avoid any of the